January 1944. The sun barely brushes the horizon over a jagged Pacific island. Waves crash with a relentless rhythm against black volcanic sand. Salt hangs heavy in the air, stinging the eyes of men already soaked in sweat. From the distant horizon, the silhouettes of armored landing craft glide silently across the water. Inside, American soldiers grip rifles and gear, hearts pounding. At the prow, the first LVT, 4 amphibious tanks shift forward, their treads churning through shallow surf. Japanese bunkers cling stubbornly to the ridges above, spitting occasional tracer fire that sparks against the armored hulls. Machine guns chatter, shells whine, and yet these steel beasts push relentlessly toward the beach. Soldiers inside glance at each other with tense determination, knowing this moment could decide life or death in the opening minutes of a battle neither side fully understands yet. On the shore, Japanese defenders peer through slit trenches, scanning for threats they are not fully prepared to counter. Something in the distance moves differently than any previous landing. The roar of engines, the grind of treads climbing sand. They had never expected this. The battle for the beach is about to begin, and with it, a lesson in the brutal calculus of innovation. By early 1944, the Pacific War had already claimed thousands of lives and carved countless islands into battlegrounds. The Japanese Empire, stretching from the northern Philippines to the Solomons, held vast territory, but each possession came at a cost. The Allies had recognized early that a direct assault on the Japanese home islands was impossible without first isolating each stronghold. Thus, the island-hopping strategy emerged. Leapfrog fortified positions, seize strategically vital islands, and cut supply lines, forcing Japan into defensive pockets. The Japanese, aware of this strategy, had prepared accordingly. On each island, bunkers, artillery emplacements, and interconnected trenches formed a labyrinthine defense. Sand beaches were reinforced with steel obstacles, wooden stakes, and mines, all designed to repel conventional landing craft. Japanese commanders were confident that any amphibious assault could be channeled into preset kill zones, where defenders could exploit terrain and entrench firepower. The doctrine was simple: hold the beach, force the attackers to bleed. Yet the Allies had quietly evolved a new approach. Behind the American lines, engineers, tank designers, and strategists were reimagining the mechanics of amphibious warfare. The solution emerged as the LVT, Landing Vehicle Tract. Initially conceived in the 1930s as a logistical transport for swampy terrain in Louisiana, these vehicles have been modified into armored assault platforms capable of carrying men, equipment, and even light artillery across coral reefs, surf, and sand. By 1944, the LVT-4 variant could carry 21 fully armed troops or a light tank, while its armor offered protection against small arms fire. The development of the LVT was not merely technological, it was tactical. Commanders realized that speed, surprise, and the ability to traverse previously impassable beaches could overwhelm even the most prepared defenders. For American soldiers trained on these machines, the lesson was drilled into every landing exercise: advance relentlessly, exploit terrain, and trust the vehicle to carry them forward. Meanwhile, Japanese intelligence had failed to anticipate this evolution. Observers noted the increase in Allied shipping and landing exercises in places like Hawaii and New Guinea, but misjudged the scale and capability of the armored units. They expected traditional Higgins boats, slow and vulnerable, not armor-tracked vehicles capable of scaling beaches and crushing obstacles designed to stop infantry. Reconnaissance reports underestimated the threat, and training manuals emphasized the familiar: artillery, mines, and barbed wire. The possibility that an armored amphibious assault could bypass these defenses entirely seemed remote. The Pacific Theater of 1944 was thus a collision of assumptions and innovation. American planners, operating from bases in the Solomons and later the Marshalls, were preparing to test the LVTs in conditions that mirrored potential Japanese countermeasures. Each unit was assigned precise landing coordinates, timed to the tide, with engineers ready to clear obstacles under fire. Meanwhile, the Japanese relied on doctrine, confidence in their bunkers, and the belief that no vehicle could breach their fortified beaches without staggering losses. Across the islands, the human element compounded these technological calculations. American soldiers trained for months, running drills in waist-deep surf, learning to maintain their composure under the roar of simulated artillery. Engineers studied coral formations and tide charts. Commanders calculated fuel, ammunition, and armor needs with surgical precision. On the Japanese side, conscripts and seasoned veterans alike fortified positions, knowing that the first wave of attackers would define the battle. Yet, they lacked one crucial understanding. The very nature of the threat had changed. The contrast between these approaches set the stage for a collision that would redefine amphibious warfare. Where Japanese defenders relied on static fortifications and predictable kill zones, American attackers embraced mobility, surprise, and armored resilience. The island beaches, once considered natural defensive bulwarks, were about to be tested in a way the Japanese command had never anticipated. As the LVTs were loaded and final preparations completed in the pre-dawn hours, a silent tension gripped both sides. On one hand, soldiers and crews clutched their rifles, checked their equipment, and braced for impact. On the other, Japanese sentries gazed toward the horizon, scanning familiar shapes of incoming craft, unaware that these were no ordinary landing boats. The stage was set, not merely for a battle of men, but for a confrontation between human expectation and mechanical innovation. The first encounter of this new amphibious warfare was imminent, and the consequences would ripple through the Pacific, challenging assumptions and reshaping strategy. The Japanese command's confidence was built on years of successful defense in the Pacific. From Guadalcanal to Tarawa, they had inflicted heavy casualties on Allied forces using entrenched positions, overlapping fields of fire, and intricate bunker networks. Intelligence reports emphasize the importance of coastal defenses, the deadly efficiency of machine guns, and the lethal reach of artillery. But these reports overlooked a quiet revolution occurring in American amphibious doctrine. By late 1943, the U.S. Marine Corps and Army engineers had refined the LVT for a more than just a transport vehicle. It was now a fully armored amphibious assault platform capable of bridging coral reefs, crossing tidal flats, and scaling beaches under fire. The vehicle's tracks allowed it to traverse terrain that would have halted ordinary landing craft. Its armor provided protection against small arms and light artillery. The LVTs could deliver troops, weapons, and even flame tanks directly onto the beach, bypassing obstacles that were designed to funnel attackers into kill zones. In theory, these vehicles could render traditional Japanese beach fortifications nearly irrelevant. In practice, their effectiveness would depend on precise timing, crew skill, and coordination with infantry. The Allies conducted exercises on remote Pacific islands, simulating surf conditions, coral reefs, and enemy fire. Troops learned to dismount from moving vehicles under intense pressure. Engineers tested explosives and clearance methods to ensure obstacles would not slow the armored advance. Every detail was scrutinized. Failure was not an option. Japanese reconnaissance, however, failed to detect the scale of this innovation. Aerial and naval scouting had reported activity along the Hawaiian Islands and New Guinea, but the armored component of these exercises was largely invisible from afar. Intelligence assessments continued to emphasize conventional tactics: mines, steel stakes, artillery, and strategically placed machine guns. There was no precedent for imagining armored vehicles that could climb, the beaches and survive under direct fire. Japanese officers assumed that American landings would be gradual, costly, and predictable. Their doctrine dictated patience and discipline, relying on prepared kill zones to decimate approaching troops. This misjudgment would prove catastrophic. The Japanese underestimated not only the technology, but also the psychological impact of armored amphibious vehicles. Troops on the beaches would face an unprecedented combination. Soldiers emerging under fire while armored vehicles surged over obstacles, crushing defenses and delivering infantry to the very heart of their fortifications. The mere sight of LVTs advancing across coral-strewn sand created confusion and disrupted defensive cohesion. Meanwhile, the Allies meticulously planned the first major deployments of these vehicles. Island landing maps were marked with precise landing points, tight schedules, and obstacle positions. Commanders coordinated artillery barrages to soften defenses, while engineers and infantry were trained to work in tandem with the LVTs. Each vehicle had a designated role, some to deliver troops, others to tow flamethrowers or light artillery. The approach was methodical, rehearsed, and rehearsed again. Speed and surprise were paramount. The human dimension of this preparation cannot be overstated. Crews studied every mechanical function of the LVT, understanding the limits of its tracks, engine, and armor. Soldiers rehearsed dismounting in surf, maintaining formation under fire, and navigating chaotic terrain. In a war dominated by uncertainty, the combination of rigorous training and mechanical reliability offered a rare edge. As the first waves approached Japanese-held beaches, the contrast between expectation and reality became evident. Commanders and soldiers who had relied on entrenched fortifications were confronted with a new paradigm. The beaches, once considered natural defensive choke points, were no longer insurmountable. LVTs could traverse coral reefs, crush barbed wire, and carry men directly into positions that had previously seemed secure. Every assumption about how a beach landing should unfold was about to be tested. By the time dawn broke over the targeted islands, the stage was fully set. The Japanese had fortified the beaches for a traditional assault, confident in their ability to inflict maximum casualties. The Allies, in contrast, had orchestrated a landing that combined human determination, armored innovation, and tactical precision. The first clash between these realities would not only determine the outcome of a single battle, but would also redefine amphibious warfare across the Pacific. The quiet tension of preparation gave way to the inevitability of action. The first armored vehicles, cutting through surf and sand, signaled the end of old assumptions. The human, technological, and tactical elements all converged on the beach, a collision that would leave no participant unchanged. For the men inside the LVTs, the beach was more than a battlefield. It was a crucible of fear and resolve. Soldiers gripped rifles and gear as waves crashed over the armored hulls. Sweat mixed with salt water, stinging eyes, and chilling muscles. Each movement was deliberate. Every second mattered. Many had trained for months, running drills across surf and coral, yet nothing fully prepared them for the real landing. Inside one LVT, Private James Callahan gripped the steering wheel as the vehicle lurched forward. He glanced at his fellow Marines, faces tight with concentration, eyes fixed on the distant ridge where Japanese bunkers loomed. The roar of engines drowned out thought, leaving instinct and training to guide each action. Around them, the surf hissed, and the hull groaned under the strain of sand and coral. This was no ordinary landing. It was the first true test of the armored amphibious assault. On the Japanese side, defenders peered from slit trenches, anticipation tight in their chests. They had been trained to expect waves of soldiers on foot, vulnerable and predictable. Instead, the approaching armored vehicles seemed impervious, moving steadily over obstacles meant to halt infantry. Confusion rippled through the lines. Orders were shouted, weapons fired, yet the impact of these steel beasts was immediate and disorienting. The human experience on both sides, fear, determination, and shock, shaped the opening moments of battle in ways no map or plan could fully predict. The landing was the culmination of months of planning and meticulous calculation. American commanders had mapped every beach, charting tides, coral formations, and enemy fortifications. Each LVT had a precise role. Some delivered infantry directly to weak points in the Japanese line, while others towed flamethrowers, mortars, or light artillery. Coordination was critical. A single vehicle delayed or misrouted could jeopardize the entire assault. Timing, too, was crucial. Pre-landing naval bombardments softened known enemy positions but could not clear every obstacle. Engineers in the assault waves were trained to identify and neutralize remaining hazards under fire, working in tandem with the armored vehicles. The tactical philosophy was clear. Mobility and armored resilience could neutralize entrenched defenses, turning a static battlefield into one dominated by dynamic action. The Japanese defenders had created intricate kill zones, intending to channel attackers into predetermined areas. Yet the tactical paradigm had shifted. LVTs could cross coral reefs, avoid obstacles, and land men behind or beside defensive emplacements. Pre-planned artillery fire and machine gun positions, once highly effective, now faced unpredictability. Tactical superiority was no longer purely a function of numbers or fortifications. It required adaptation to new forms of mechanized assault. At the core of this transformation was the LVT-4 itself. With armored plating capable of withstanding small arms fire, robust tracks designed for sand and coral, and a payload capacity of 21 troops or light artillery, it was a vehicle built for the unique challenges of the Pacific theater. Unlike conventional landing craft, it could traverse terrain previously deemed impassable. Each vehicle became a mobile fortress, capable of delivering men and weapons directly to the enemy line while offering protection from the initial hail of bullets and shells. The LVT was not merely a transport, it was a weapon of innovation. Crews had learned to exploit its strengths while mitigating weaknesses. Shallow drafts allowed it to approach beaches close enough to bypass obstacles, yet operators had to account for surf conditions, weight distribution, and mechanical limits. Maintenance under field conditions was crucial. A stalled vehicle could disrupt the landing sequence and expose infantry to concentrated fire. In practice, the LVT combined engineering ingenuity with human skill. Tanks and infantry moved as a single unit, overcoming natural and man-made barriers alike. This technological edge directly challenged the Japanese assumption that beach fortifications would dictate the pace and outcome of a landing. By examining these perspectives, the soldiers' human experience, the tactical choreography of the landing, and the technological leap represented by the LVT, it becomes clear why the Japanese defenses were ill-prepared. Each angle reveals a different facet of the same event. The collision of human determination, calculated planning, and innovative machinery. The final moments of this section lead naturally into the next, where leadership decisions, enemy psychology, and moral considerations further shape the story of the amphibious assault. The success of any amphibious assault depended not only on machines and men, but on the decisions of those commanding from both sides. On the American side, Major General Harry Schmidt and his subordinate commanders orchestrated each landing with meticulous precision. They coordinated naval bombardments, timing, and the sequencing of LVT waves to maximize surprise and minimize casualties. Schmidt's orders emphasized flexibility. Crews and infantry were trained to respond to unexpected resistance without losing momentum. Leadership, in this sense, was less about issuing commands and more about enabling initiative in a complex, dynamic environment. Japanese commanders, by contrast, faced a crisis of doctrine. Brigadier General Takashi Takashina, responsible for the island's defenses, relied heavily on pre-existing fortifications and standard operating procedures. His plans assumed that attackers would be constrained by obstacles, predictable in movement, and vulnerable to concentrated fire. When armored vehicles began to traverse reefs and sand dunes that had been considered impassable, command structures were disrupted. Orders intended to channel the attack into kill zones became obsolete, and confusion spread among officers and soldiers alike. Leadership under fire requires rapid adaptation, yet the rigid Japanese doctrine left little room for improvisation, compounding the shock of the new American tactics. For the Japanese defenders, the amphibious assault shattered expectations within moments. They had watched previous landings from Tarawa to Saipan, trained extensively in repelling infantry, and believed their emplacements and fields of fire would dictate the battle. Yet, the LVTs moved with an unexpected persistence, carrying men and weapons over obstacles and neutralizing defensive advantages. The psychological impact was immediate. Soldiers exposed to fire from these armored vehicles hesitated, fired inaccurately, or retreated into bunkers, disrupting unit cohesion. Japanese gunners struggled to prioritize targets, unsure whether to focus on the vehicles or the infantry they delivered. Intelligence had failed to anticipate such a threat. Doctrine had left them unprepared for its scale. In real time, what had been a structured defense became a reactive scramble, the enemy's strategy collapsing under the weight of American innovation. The amphibious assault also carried profound moral implications, both for attackers and defenders. For American troops, seeing armored vehicles pushing forward despite bullets and shells reinforced a sense of invincibility, but also forced confrontation with the brutal reality of war. They were not merely breaking through obstacles. They were delivering men into enemy fire, witnesses to casualties that were immediate, visible, and unavoidable. Training had prepared them technically, but moral courage, facing fear and uncertainty while advancing relentlessly, was tested in real time. For Japanese soldiers, the moral toll was equally severe. Entrenched, yet powerless to halt armored vehicles, many faced the realization that doctrine, discipline, and training might not suffice against a new type of warfare. Confusion and fear eroded morale. Those who survived the initial landing were forced to improvise or retreat, often against deeply held beliefs in duty and honor. The assault thus became not only a tactical confrontation, but a psychological one, where the shock of technological innovation challenged assumptions, confidence, and the very willingness to fight. Viewed through these angles, leadership, enemy psychology, and moral weight, the amphibious assault emerges as more than a military operation. It was a crucible where human determination, innovation, and doctrine collided. Leadership enabled adaptation, but only when commanders could balance precise planning with flexible execution. Enemy forces faced not just a tactical problem, but a profound challenge to their expectations and beliefs. And the human moral dimension, experienced on both sides, shaped reactions in ways that statistics alone could never capture. Together with the human, tactical, and technological perspectives from the previous section, these angles provide a complete picture. The Japanese had anticipated conventional threats, while the Allies leveraged machines, strategy, and morale in unison. The landing was not merely a clash of soldiers. It was a confrontation between old assumptions and new possibilities, setting the stage for a decisive turning point that would redefine the course of the battle. Dawn had barely broken over the island when the first waves of LVT-4s surged through the surf. Engines roared, tracks churned against sand and coral, and water sprayed high along armored flanks. The air smelled of salt, smoke, and oil, a raw, metallic tension that clung to every man and machine. For the American crews, this was the culmination of months of training, For the Japanese defenders, it was the arrival of a threat they had not anticipated. The first vehicles hit the beach with relentless force. Japanese gunners opened fire, bullets spattering against armor. Yet the LVTs pressed forward. Inside, soldiers braced as the hulls pitched over coral ridges and sandbars. Private Callahan, gripping his rifle, felt the vehicle's vibrations through his body. Each foot of progress carried men closer to entrenched bunkers, closer to the heart of the enemy's defenses. The choreography of the landing was precise. Engineers cleared obstacles, artillery and machine guns provided cover, and infantry disembarked in waves, coordinated with the armored advance. From the ridge, Japanese officers shouted orders, attempting to redirect fire and patch gaps in the collapsing line. Their kill zones, carefully calculated in months of preparation, were bypassed with ease. The first LVT carried flame throwers and light artillery directly into positions once thought impregnable. Shock spread among defenders. Hesitation became deadly. Machine gunners, uncertain whether to target the vehicle or the men it carried, fired erratically. Mortar crews scrambled to reposition under a sudden, unrelenting assault. On the beach itself, the human cost was immediate. Sand was churned with shell craters. Bodies fell in bursts of fire, and screams punctuated the roar of engines. Yet the armored vehicles continued. Each LVT seemed almost unstoppable, a moving bastion that defied expectation. Soldiers disembarked into Japanese fire, but the momentum of the assault kept units cohesive. Where hesitation might have caused collapse, discipline and training held the line. A critical moment arrived when the leading LVTs encountered the central bunker, heavily armed and positioned to command the beach. American commanders had anticipated this obstacle, timing an artillery barrage to coincide with the approach. Shells slammed into the emplacement, smoke and debris filling the air. Simultaneously, flame-thrower-equipped LVTs advanced, hurling fire into positions where Japanese soldiers had believed themselves untouchable. The combination of technology, timing, and human determination shattered the bunker's defense in minutes. Japanese counterattacks followed immediately. Soldiers attempted to flank the LVTs with machine guns and mortars, and small groups charged toward exposed vehicles with grenades. Yet the armor held, and infantry inside returned fire with lethal precision. The coordinated assault, armored vehicles, supporting artillery, and disembarking infantry demonstrated a tactical synergy the Japanese had never faced. What had been a prepared defense quickly became a chaotic struggle for survival. The tide, both literal and metaphorical, was turning. Each successful landing reinforced the confidence of American troops. Crews learned to maneuver around obstacles, coordinate dismounts under fire, and support fellow vehicles in peril. Officers observed and adapted, communicating via signal flags and radios, ensuring that the rhythm of the assault remained unbroken. By mid-morning, the first significant Japanese defensive lines had been penetrated. The LVTs continued to push inland, carrying reinforcements, mortars, and flamethrowers. The central defensive ridge, once thought unassailable, was now a contested zone. The combination of surprise, mobility, and armored protection had created a decisive advantage. Where Japanese troops had expected a gradual, attritional engagement, they found themselves overwhelmed in the first crucial hours of battle. This initial success was not merely physical. It carried enormous psychological weight. Defenders were forced to confront a reality they had not anticipated. The enemy could traverse obstacles, breach strong points, and maintain momentum under fire. For American troops, each advance confirmed the doctrine they had drilled for months, demonstrating that technology, training, and morale could overcome even the most formidable fortifications. Yet the battle was far from over. While the beachhead had been secured, pockets of Japanese resistance remained, and counterattacks threatened to disrupt the fragile momentum. Every man, every vehicle, and every decision in the next few hours would test the cohesion and effectiveness of this unprecedented amphibious assault. The turning point had begun, but its final resolution awaited further struggle, courage, and ingenuity. By late morning, the beachhead had become a maelstrom of fire, smoke, and movement. LVTs continued to pour ashore, engines grinding, tracks tearing into sand and coral. Troops disembarked under a relentless hail of machine gun fire, yet the vehicles themselves absorbed the brunt of the initial defensive efforts. Japanese artillery, calibrated for infantry-filled beaches, struggled to track the moving armored targets. Shells splashed harmlessly into surf or detonated against reinforced hulls. The psychological impact on defenders was as devastating as the physical destruction. The Central Ridge, a linchpin of Japanese fortifications, had become a focal point. Flame tanks and LVTs carrying light artillery advanced with precision. As explosions shook the bunkers, infantry followed in tightly coordinated waves, clearing trenches and pillboxes with grenades and bayonets. Japanese soldiers, trained to hold their positions to the last man, found themselves overwhelmed not only by firepower, but by the sheer unpredictability of armored mobility. Orders shouted from command posts could not compensate for the collapse of pre-planned kill zones. Small groups of Japanese troops attempted desperate counterattacks. Some charged the LVTs with satchel charges or grenades, hoping to disable the vehicles and stall the landing. Others tried to snipe operators through viewports, aiming for vulnerabilities in the armor. Yet the coordination of American forces neutralized these efforts. Supporting infantry secured flanks. Engineers cleared obstacles, and additional LVTs provided suppressive fire. Every counterattack was repelled, and the tide of battle continued moving inland. Amid the chaos, acts of individual courage punctuated the broader operation. Crewmen repaired stalled vehicles under fire. Infantry squads charged exposed positions to protect LVT operators. Signalmen dashed across the beach to relay orders, bridging the gap between command and action. These human decisions, small but critical, ensured the assault maintained momentum, reinforcing the symbiosis between technology and training. By midday, the beach was effectively in Allied hands. What had begun as a tenuous landing had evolved into a secured foothold, a bridgehead from which reinforcements could pour inland. Japanese defensive lines were shattered, bunkers were destroyed or abandoned, and remaining forces retreated towards secondary positions, their morale fractured by the unprecedented assault. The battlefield bore the scars of concentrated effort: shell craters, churned sand, overturned vehicles, and the silent testimony of casualties. The success of the LVT assault was more than tactical. It was transformative. Japanese assumptions about coastal defense, based on previous victories and established doctrine, had been decisively challenged. The combination of armored mobility, coordinated infantry, and precise timing demonstrated that entrenched positions were no longer invulnerable. Commanders took note, and soldiers on both sides internalized the lesson. The dynamics of amphibious warfare had changed irreversibly. As the afternoon wore on, secondary objectives were seized. LVTs carried reinforcements and supplies inland, consolidating the position and preparing for anticipated counterattacks. Artillery and flamethrower teams neutralized remaining pockets of resistance, while infantry secured ridges and approaches. The initial shock had passed, but the operation's momentum ensured that Japanese forces could not regroup effectively. Each movement inland was a confirmation of the assault's success, a demonstration that the integration of human skill and mechanical innovation had tipped the scales. The turning point was complete. What had seemed an uncertain gamble, a beach landing under fire, had become a model of operational success. Casualties were heavy, but the beachhead held. Japanese resistance, though still present, was disorganized and reactive. American commanders, observing the operation from offshore command posts, understood that the effectiveness of the LVTs had reshaped their approach to island assaults. This was not a mere tactical victory. It was a doctrinal revelation. By evening, the first day of the landing closed with the beach firmly in Allied control. Smoke rose from bunkers and trenches, mingling with the humid Pacific air. Soldiers, exhausted but determined, consolidated positions, repaired vehicles, and prepared for the inevitable follow-on attacks. Across the battlefield, the significance of the day began to sink in. Armored amphibious vehicles had not only carried men across the beach, they had carried the future of warfare forward. The initial engagement, brutal and chaotic, had proven the concept. Japanese assumptions were overturned, American tactics validated, and the island itself was on the verge of being fully secured. The human, technological, and tactical factors converged in a decisive moment that would resonate far beyond the beach. And as night fell, the war on this island, and the lessons it taught, were only beginning to take shape. As dusk settled over the island, the beach bore the unmistakable signs of a brutal engagement. Sand churned into craters by artillery shells, smoke curling from destroyed bunkers, and scattered debris marking the paths of vehicles and soldiers alike. For the American forces, the first day of the landing was a success, yet victory came at a human cost. Dozens of soldiers lay wounded or fallen, their uniforms soaked in sweat and blood. Crews of the LVTs counted each vehicle that had survived the assault, knowing that every loss might have disrupted the delicate orchestration of the landing. Reports from the beach detailed the effectiveness of the amphibious tanks. Commanders noted that the vehicles had absorbed much of the initial defensive fire, allowing infantry to disembark with reduced casualties compared to previous landings without armored support. Engineers and artillery units observed how obstacles, once considered insurmountable, were neutralized or bypassed. Tactical assessments confirmed that the integration of armor, infantry, and pre-planned bombardments had shattered the Japanese defensive assumptions. On the Japanese side, the consequences were immediate and demoralizing. Defenders had retreated to secondary positions, but the cohesion of their forces was fractured. Commanders, including Brigadier General Takashi Takashina, recognized that pre-existing doctrine had failed. Kill zones, barbed wire, and machine gun emplacements had been circumvented by armored vehicles. Traditional strategies could not recover the lost beachhead. Soldiers faced the dual burden of casualties and the psychological shock of encountering an enemy that had seemingly rewritten the rules of engagement. Eyewitness accounts from Japanese soldiers described confusion and disbelief. Some units had attempted counterattacks, only to be repelled by the coordinated assault of LVTs and infantry. Morale deteriorated as men realized that their training had not prepared them for this new type of assault. Intelligence reports later cited this engagement as evidence that Allied tactics had evolved beyond the capabilities of conventional Japanese coastal defenses. For American commanders, the beach landing offered both relief and insight. While casualties were a sobering reminder of the operation's danger, the effectiveness of the LVTs validated months of planning, training, and innovation. Officers documented every detail: the timing of landings, the coordination between vehicles and infantry, and the role of pre-landing bombardments. Lessons learned here would inform subsequent operations across the Pacific, influencing tactics from Saipan to Iwo Jima. Beyond strategy, the immediate aftermath revealed the human dimension of the battle. Soldiers tended to the wounded, recovered fallen comrades, and checked their equipment for the next day's operations. Engineers worked under fading light to repair damaged vehicles, clear obstacles, and ensure that the beachhead remained viable. The physical and emotional exhaustion was profound, yet discipline and cohesion held the units together. This combination of human endurance and mechanical resilience had transformed a high-risk operation into a sustainable foothold. The first reports transmitted to higher command emphasized not only the tactical success, but also the strategic significance. The LVTs had proven their worth in live combat, capable of overcoming obstacles that had previously dictated the flow of amphibious assaults. Japanese defenses, once considered formidable, had been neutralized through a combination of innovation, training, and precise execution. As night fell, the battle for the island was far from over. Pockets of Japanese resistance remained, artillery positions could still harass the beachhead, and counterattacks were expected at dawn. Yet the psychological and tactical edge had shifted decisively to the Americans. The first day had demonstrated that amphibious tanks were not merely auxiliary support. They were central to the success of island assaults. In the quiet moments of evening, soldiers on both sides contemplated the shifting nature of warfare. The Japanese realized that old strategies, reliant on static defenses, were increasingly vulnerable. The Americans, conversely, understood that the combination of armor, infantry, and engineering ingenuity had created a new standard for amphibious operations. The lessons of this day would resonate far beyond the sands of this island, influencing decisions, tactics, and morale across the Pacific theater. The battle had turned, but its ripple effects were only beginning. The next hours, the next movements, and the full consequences of this unprecedented landing would shape the subsequent days of the campaign, setting the stage for a strategic and psychological reckoning. The morning after the landing, the island was a transformed landscape. Scorched bunkers, overturned vehicles, and churned sand testified to the ferocity of the initial assault. Japanese defenders who had survived the first wave regrouped in secondary positions, but their cohesion was shattered. Reports from the field detailed heavy casualties, disrupted command structures, and dwindling morale. The Allied beachhead was secure, and with it, the psychological momentum of the campaign had shifted decisively. Casualty figures were grim, yet illustrative of the operation's cost-effectiveness. American records later documented that the use of LVTs had reduced infantry losses compared to previous unarmored landings. The hundreds still fell to gunfire, artillery, or the unforgiving terrain. Japanese losses were substantial, with estimates of several hundred killed or wounded in the opening hours alone. The destruction of key fortifications meant that survivors were often forced to retreat inland, abandoning pre-planned defensive lines. These numbers reflected more than human cost. They underscored the tactical impact of innovation meeting doctrine unprepared for adaptation. Strategically, the successful landing validated the Allied approach to Pacific island warfare. Commanders across the theater recognized that armored amphibious vehicles could overcome obstacles once thought insurmountable, enabling faster and more flexible operations. Intelligence reports highlighted that Japanese assumptions about beach defenses no longer held. Where previously the Allies had expected protracted, attritional battles, LVTs allowed rapid establishment of a secure foothold, enabling subsequent waves to advance inland with minimal delay. The psychological and operational advantages of surprise, mobility, and armored support were now undeniable. The Japanese High Command faced stark reassessment. Doctrines reliant on static defenses, calculated kill zones, and artillery dominance were increasingly obsolete. Reports circulated among senior officers noting that armored amphibious assaults had created vulnerabilities previously unanticipated. Some units adapted by constructing deeper inland defensive positions and emphasizing counterattacks. Yet the advantage had shifted. The early loss of the beachhead illustrated a fundamental principle. Innovation, when combined with disciplined execution, could neutralize even the most fortified positions. On the American side, commanders meticulously documented the lessons of the landing. After-action reports emphasized coordination, timing, and the integration of infantry and armor. Engineers highlighted obstacles successfully bypassed or destroyed, while LVT crews provided insights into mechanical performance, reliability, and tactical deployment under fire. This data informed operations at Saipan, Guam, and later Iwo Jima, where amphibious vehicles became central to landing strategies. The operational doctrine of the Pacific Theater had evolved in real time, shaped by both human experience and mechanical capability. The aftermath also carried profound moral and psychological dimensions. For Japanese troops, witnessing the resilience of armored vehicles and the relentless advance of American infantry created doubt and fear. Officers noted that morale had suffered not merely from casualties, but from the realization that their preparations could be so thoroughly circumvented. Conversely, American soldiers gained confidence in both their machines and their training, reinforcing a sense of invincibility tempered only by the sobering cost of combat. Reports from war correspondents, engineers, and surviving soldiers all converged on a single conclusion. The amphibious tank had transformed the calculus of Pacific warfare. Beaches were no longer unassailable fortresses. They were points of entry that could be exploited with speed, coordination, and technology. The battle had demonstrated that doctrine, while important, could be rewritten through innovation. The shock of this realization rippled through both commands, altering strategies, expectations, and the very psychology of engagement. By the close of the first full day, the beachhead was not only held, it was a symbol of technological ingenuity, tactical precision, and human courage converging to overcome entrenched defenses. The immediate victory set the tone for subsequent operations, reshaping Allied approaches and forcing Japanese commanders to reconsider entrenched assumptions. Every surviving LVT, every infantry squad that reached inland, and every obstacle overcome testified to a new era in amphibious warfare. The island, still scarred and unstable, awaited further combat, yet the decisive moment had passed. The combination of armor, planning, and human determination had created a breakthrough that extended far beyond the sands of this single beach. The lessons of this landing, the triumphs, the costs, and the innovations, would resonate across the Pacific, redefining amphibious operations for the remainder of the war. The stage was now set for reflection, for understanding what this battle meant not only tactically, but strategically and philosophically. The human, technological, and moral lessons of the amphibious assault had been writ large, leaving a legacy that would extend well beyond this island. The waves lapped quietly against the scarred beach, indifferent to the chaos that had unfolded just hours before. The sand, once churned by engines, fire, and human struggle, now bore the subtle marks of movement, reminders of both triumph and sacrifice. In the aftermath, the battle revealed more than the physical outcome of men and machines. It revealed the evolution of warfare itself. The LVTs had done more than carry soldiers across obstacles. They had rewritten the rules of amphibious combat. Where defenders relied on assumptions, attackers relied on innovation, coordination, and courage. The juxtaposition of old doctrine and new technology demonstrated a timeless truth. War is as much about adaptation as it is about strength. Every decision, every maneuver, and every act of bravery contributed to a chain reaction that extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. For Japanese commanders, the landing was a stark lesson in the perils of static thinking. Fortifications, kill zones, and meticulous planning could no longer guarantee security. The battle forced a reevaluation of defensive strategy, highlighting the growing importance of intelligence, flexibility, and anticipation. For American forces, it was validation, proof that careful preparation, technological advancement, and disciplined execution could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. Yet beyond strategy and machines, the human element remained central. Soldiers faced fear, uncertainty, and the weight of responsibility. The cost was measured not only in casualties, but in courage, the small, deliberate choices that allowed men to advance under fire, to trust in their comrades, and to confront the unexpected with resolve. It is this combination of humanity and innovation that endures as the defining legacy of the operation. The battle for the beach and the moment when armored vehicles first climbed the sand under fire stands as a turning point in history. It reminds us that the course of warfare is shaped not solely by numbers or fortifications, but by ingenuity, adaptability, and the indomitable will of those who dare to bridge the impossible. In the stillness that followed, the island itself became a testament to human determination, to technological evolution, and to the enduring lesson that even the most entrenched defenses can be overcome when preparation meets invention.